Welcome back, viewers, listeners, and readers of the Niche website. It's October, beginning of October, which means it's time for our next episode of Environmental History Worth Reading for September 2015. I'm Sean Courage, an editor here at niche-canada.org, and I'm joined by Jessica.
I'm Jessica DeWitt, and I am the niche social media editor.
So, Jessica, you've scoured the internet for the very best
Mhm.
of environmental history writing, video, audio that you could find that's been shared on the internet. And you've come up with 5 picks from September 2015, which readers can find on the Niche website right now, just below us in this video here. But we're going to do a rundown of those, starting with earthquakes on the Northwest coast.
Yeah, so in this article, they state that they're showing how stories merge into histories. And much of the article focuses on the Great Quake of January 26, 1700. And the author discusses how geologists have looked at how these superquakes have been happening every 500 years or so during the past 10,000 years. Um, but the turning point in the article is that she argues that indigenous peoples have known about these quakes far longer than scientists. Scientists have only known about them since the 1980s,
Mm-hmm.
and indigenous peoples in the area have had stories passed down through their generations about these quakes, so they've always known that they occur. Just a really great article about indigenous knowledge and how that can mesh with scientific knowledge.
I was just talking about this in one of my classes for the case of coastal British Columbia and Squamish oral histories about earthquakes that go
Mhm.
back thousands of years of massive earthquakes. Your second pick, pipe dreams. Now, this one will be very interesting for Canadian viewers.
Yeah. So this one was on BuzzFeed, which I was a little
Yeah.
surprised, but they seem they've gotten into the serious history articles. So it begins with a story about a California wildfire, and you think that it's from the present day, but the kicker is that it's from 1961. And then the author discusses how this period of drought in California um, made this engineer, Ralph Parsons, wish to figure out a way to permanently secure California's water sources and to make sure that no droughts happen in the future. And his project that he developed was called the North American Water and Power Alliance. And basically, this project was to take water from northern Canada and pipe it down into Western US.
Mm-hmm.
Because well, Canada has too much water. So it's a really interesting article. There's a lot of interesting maps, and it shows how the different reactions from people about the project and how, although it never came into fruition, it's still it isn't dead entirely. People still base present day projects on this idea. So that's
Yeah, it
interesting.
would have been interesting to see how, if this imagined plan of diverting Canadian water into the American Southwest had come to be, what effect that would have had on something like the Columbia River Treaty that would have been negotiated around the same time. The idea of water sharing between Canada and the United States is not so extraordinary,
Hmm.
but perhaps the scale of this plan is. And of
Yeah.
course, viewers are seeing some of these incredible images and then the graphs and charts about the effects that this could have on water distribution.
Hmm.
And this is all within the context of the drought in California and other parts of the American West right now.
Yep.
It's fascinating. Okay, we've got an article here by Sean Munger on Americans' ideas about weather.
Yeah, so this is kind of similar to the first couple articles in that it goes back to a prior weather event. He starts off by talking about the 1815 Great September Gale that happened in New England. And gales are what they called hurricanes back then.
Hmm.
So he talks about how this hurricane is mentioned a lot in the personal accounts that he's encountered in the archives. And he argues that these reactions to this gale illustrate the way in which people reacted to storms in comparison to today. and that people uh, several hundred years ago, 300 years ago, they understood weather as more of a holistic thing, that it was connected to past events and to things that were happening in other places in the world, such as earthquakes or volcanoes.
Hmm.
And he argues that today we tend to focus uh, more closely on the scientific expertise and aspects of weather events and fail to look to the past to understand them and think of weather more as something that's going to affect the future. And this clouds our ability to understand weather as part of a greater ecosystem.
And of course, this
So,
picks up really nicely and timely in terms of the storms in South Carolina right
mhm,
now. Yeah.
yep,
Now we spin around the globe and we're on the opposite side in Australia here. So
yep,
this is an international feature.
yes.
Looking at rabbit proofing Australia.
Yeah, I thought this was a really interesting article. Um, so the European rabbit was introduced into Australia in 1859, and it has been one of the most successful invasive species on the continent. Um, so this article is based on an artifact at the National Museum of Australia, which is a wire netted wooden fence. And this fence was once part of I think it was 400-mile long fence that was built across Australia to block rabbits from entering the western part of the continent where the most profitable grazing and farming lands were.
Hmm.
So it's just a great article. It breaks down how costly it was. Um, it looks at the reactions to it, the way it was constructed, the way that it was not particularly successful. So it's just a really interesting article. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, just looking at the map, you already get a sense of the degree to which I assume that fence was permeable. You've got
Yes.
rabbit proof fence number one, which spans the total northwest or nearly total northwest stretch of Western Australia. And then right next to it is rabbit proof fence number two. So presumably number one didn't work so well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just I find it fascinating that it was, I don't know, that we could think that we could stop rabbits with a fence.
Yeah, and
And
there is a quite a hilarious cartoon of rabbits playing tennis across the fence.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
pretty good. All right, and then we end up here with another different way of thinking about environmental history. We've got a kind of environmental history of hip hop.
Yes. So this is written by Patrick Nugent, who was one of the student bloggers for the AHA this summer. And his dissertation is an environmental history of Staten Island. And he opens up this piece by stating that one of his advisors said, "But Pat, what does all this tell us about the Wu?" And that, of course, is the Wu-Tang Clan. So in this article, he sets out to make those connections. So he mapped out where the nine MCs grew up and where they recorded on Staten Island. And he tried to look at their lyrics to understand how they saw themselves in relationship to their environment. A lot of it is looking at the language that they use, and he talks about how they flipped the language of the environmental movement in their songs to talk about the conditions in the slums that they grew up in. And he concludes that the Wu-Tang Clan is best understood the, as a response to specific environmental policies and rhetoric that has sequestered them in the Shaolin slums. So I thought it was a really kind of both a fun and an interesting piece connecting to environmental justice and urban history. So
It's great, and it's in some ways the same kind of methodology that other environmental historians have used to conservation thinkers like Thoreau or Muir to think
mhm.
about the places in which they live, the landscapes that they encountered in their daily lives, and then applying that to the late 20th century and hip hop artists.
Yes.
So that's the roundup for this September 2015. If you are intrigued by any of these picks, we highly encourage you to follow Niche on Twitter and Facebook, and I believe we're still on Google Plus. And Jessica will be out there next month looking for another few picks for October. Thanks, Jessica.
Yes. Thanks, Sean.